All right, what's going on, everyone? I wanted to do a different video this time. What I wanted to do was I was going to take you step by step in how to design your own bait. I had a chance to design my own bait for Strike King, and it was a pop and perch, and I kind of wanted to show you how it started out as an idea, all the steps to the final product and to where we are today. So it's kind of a different video. I kind of want to show you all the things that we had to go through, all the things that you might have to go through if you ever want to do something like this. It's pretty cool. Like I said, there's nothing better than designing your own bait and then going out there and catching a fish on it. So this all started back in around 2006. Frogs were out, but they really weren't where they are now. There was a couple companies making them, and even then, there's very few out there that were like they are now. They were just kind of random. They were almost idea frogs, you know, something that floated. They looked kind of like a frog. They didn't really work that well. They caught fish because no one was ever throwing them. You know, no one knew what they were. But you would lose most of them. Nothing was made right within it. So I lived on one of the best, frog lakes in the country with Rayburn. And so I wanted to when I started doing them, I was like, man, there's a lot wrong with this, right? I mean, there weren't rods made. Braid was barely coming out at the time. The hooks weren't right. Nothing was really right about them. And I thought the biggest problem is that you had all these quote unquote frog baits. There was no frogs. I mean, you saw a frog like once a year out there. What we were always after were perch, So I was like, in my head, I wanted to make a bait that was like a perch. Semi do the same things, but it really, like back then, I really wasn't even thinking of it as a frog. I just wanted to make some sort of bait that looked like a perch. So that's where it all starts, guys. It starts with an idea and then to put it down on paper. So that's what I did. This was my first ever drawing of a perch on paper. Like literally, this was it, right? And so that's what I first came down with. As you can see, it doesn't look anything like the pop and perch. It's just a perch. Okay, here's a drawing. Now I will say one thing. From that long ago, you can see that tail. And I say that because I was like, man, I want that tail to look like that. I don't know how, but I want it to look like that, to spread out. So then I started putting, color to it, right? I made, black ones, white ones, whatever, different colors. Like I said, these were the very first ones. This is going on 15, 16, 17 years ago. Okay. So that was my first kind of ever deal. Well, at the time, I wasn't involved with Strike King, and I really didn't know what I was going to do with them. I just had them, right? And that was the first deal. Well, I finally got kind of partnered up with Phil from Strike King, and we started talking, and I had this idea, and I've had this idea for years and years and years, and they were actually talking about doing something like this, and I said, hey man, I've already got it in my head, right? I've got it all, how it should work, how it should be laid out. I got everything. Like, let me just draw you up something, something else and tell me. Because I think they had tried one and it was like a complete failure. Like it didn't work right or anything. And I explained to them after now I'd had 4 or 5 years of dealing with frogs and topwater baits. I started understanding the design part of it. And I started understanding what it had to look like, not from like the perch standpoint, but from the design of the shape of it. And the problem is a perch, the design of it does not work well on top of the water. Because all perch, bluegill are fat, right? They're rounded. And anytime you make something rounded on top of the water, it just spins. Like this, you understand what I'm saying? Like it doesn't really go through the water right. So I had to narrow it up, and what I came up with was basically that picture, okay? And I put a mouth on it, right, which bothered me because it didn't look right to me. I didn't even have a tail in this one. And so I drew all this up, and then I made like 50 copies of this right here, right? So when I did that, I had that, and then I started messing around with like the tail. And so I came up with some numbers for what a tail might look like actually how many millimeters each strand should be. And at the time, you know, I'll show you a quick deal. They were gonna make these strands. They weren't even like this. They were like, this was one of the first prototypes they ever did, okay? And you can see it's not even all together. They just put them out like a frog. The back didn't even have anything on the back side of it. And if you notice, like that was always my big deal with all these baits, right? They made the top part look so pretty and the bottom part was all the same. And I'm like, all y'all are doing, these companies are, you're building these baits and you're putting 14 different colors on top, and the only thing the bass sees is the bottom, and you'll have two colors, like, or three, like white, black, and green or something. You know, like it didn't make any sense to me. Like that, I mean, we gotta make the front side look like the back side, right? And especially with the perch, because they look the same on both sides. So when I showed him that, he said, hey, that's great, but they can't do anything with that picture. You need to come down and get a ruler. And like literally I got this ruler, and this is what I made it with, right? I got a ruler, a pen, and a paper. And I sat down there and I measured. And I measured every single speck of the popping perch. So that's what I did right there, okay? Now, obviously, I didn't do that. I did that on a piece of paper. And I got every width, length, height, you name it, from the eyes to the fins to the hook to everything. I got every single measurement down to the millimeter. And when I sent that in, they computerized it, came back with that, right? And so, you know, of course, they had they had it all, which was pretty cool. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to do this. You can do this pretty easy. I just didn't have, I didn't have to. So it was kind of nice, right? And if you can look at that, like you can even see the mouth on that thing. Like, look how small that is. That's from the front view, right? So that mouth is like this. It's just one circle. I didn't know what I was, I mean, I kind of knew what I was doing, but not really. But that's what I had done. So when I got it, this was like one of the first prototypes. This might have been the first prototype. Okay, all white, no colors, because I know that other one's colored, right? And I'll give you one that's a little bit more up to date. So as you can see, like this one's, it sticks further out. The line tie, the mouth is way smaller. It just looks totally different. So as I took that one out there, everything looked for the most part okay with it. I threw it out there, man, it didn't work right. It didn't splash water. It didn't do a lot of things how I wanted it to look. The overall look of it was fine with where the hooks were and everything, but the mouth was all messed up. None of the other stuff I was even worried about. It was like, how do I make that mouth better? So we started messing around with it, and I started learning that if you can make the mouth bigger and the shape of it, I started working on that. I also realized that I had to put that line tie further and further back in. That was a big deal. It changed the whole movement of the popping perch. So couple prototypes in, we messed with that. That's kind of where we got this. You know, the problem with this one was we did some things, but the hook on this one is like way far away from the body. It's going to get hung up on everything. I still didn't like the tail because I thought it looked like the frog tail, and I didn't want that. There's nothing on the back side. The paint job, horrible. It had big old stupid looking red eye. I mean, I'll be honest with them, you know, but I wasn't too worried about all that. I knew those are cosmetic things, but there are certain things that we had to fix. So we got the body to match the hooks even better. And that was like main thing. That was like first priority, and then the mouth. And we pretty much got those done after one or two prototypes. That wasn't very hard. Then we started messing around with this tail, okay? And so we went from this tail to this tail, where they figured out a way to put the tail all the way around the back of the body. I liked that. It started taking more shape of a fin, the back tail of a perch. So that started coming together. So we were happy about that. And what we started doing was we started getting this possum perch that looked more like this. Still all white. That's how they came. But I want y'all to look, that back end right there. There's nothing back there, right? So most frogs these days, they don't have a lot of anything going back there where the hook comes out of the bottom. And what happens is a vacuum gets created on anything that you pop like that, okay? These don't happen on like pad perch style baits, right? Frogs that have a pointed nose, because when you pull on them, there's no suction, right? Well, there's suction when you pull on this, okay? So any kind of hole in this bait, it wants to always suck up water. So that became a big issue, right? Well, the first ones we made, it was crazy. We'd make some with nothing back there, and some of them would work perfect. Other ones you throw it out there and they'd sink. And so we can't have that. So we started figuring out, how do we put something back there that totally eliminates any water getting in? And so we came up with a system. I don't even know where it is. Let me find it real quick. Okay. We came up with this system. It's pretty much the first drawing. Okay. And what that was is, that's pretty much the hole. That's the hook. That's where the hook's going to come out of there, and we were going to get some form of material to use adhesive, glue, whatever, to put around the hook. It also makes the hook stay straight, because sometimes when you have those hooks, right, and there's nothing there to keep them straight, as you set the hook on them, sometimes they'll bend out like that, and they'll bend different ways. Well, with this thing, this gamut we put in there, that gamut would keep the hook straight. They would never try to bend because of that. And then we had to use adhesive to put around that to secure it to the bait. That was hard in itself. The process on how they glued it on there became like they had to do certain steps every single time, like a certain way, a process to do it. Because if they didn't do that process, it would start breaking. The first gamut that they used was a real plasticky material, so if I throw it up there and you hit a boat dock or a tree or something hard, it could crack it and break it. Once it cracked, it'd sink. So they finally figured out this weird rubberized material. Could not tell you what it is. They put that in there. It stopped breaking. It was able to be, use adhesive on there in the process. And I know the process has to be the right way, because one time they did the process wrong. I got it, and after like a day, it started coming unglued. So that was pretty cool. So they got all that done, and we figured out how to seal it. And that was great, right? The problem with this, when you seal something, you could squeeze on it and nothing would happen. So you have to be able to compress it, because once you compress it, if you can see, as you compress it, right, when you set the hook, you want it to compress so those hooks get whatever you're trying to hook, right? Because if not, you really have to. You can do it, trust me, we've done it without it, but you can do it without it compressing. But the faster and quicker it compresses, the more you get more of a hook going into whatever you're trying to hook. So that's what we knew, that was going to be an issue. So we started coming up with different holes on the front of it and stuff like that. And I'll get back to that, because that was an ongoing issue that we were going to have to figure out. At the same time, we were still getting colors. So they wanted me to do the right colors at the same time and fix all this, because when you're building these, the more prototypes you do, the more money it costs. And so I was trying to do the hole, the gamut underneath, and the colors all at the same time, and hope that they get them all right when they send back another prototype. So colors. So I've been fortunate enough that I've been able to color and draw a little bit. And so in my head, I'll be honest, I'm only really good with Prismacolors. That's what I grew up with doing. So I started messing around with different colors, right? And so what I would do was I kind of started off with something like that, you know, and I was just trying to figure out what kind of process I would go. So I had different designs in different colors. And man, I got really technical on these. I've tried different ways to do them, different designs. Some of them were like this, because I started realizing that they were going to be very hard to paint what I was drawing, because I started getting really, really detailed. Okay, like some of these, like I got to where I draw exact scales on them. Okay, and I came up with, I mean, tons of these. This one, like I got so much that I actually put every scale in there. Okay, and I had to come up with names. I forgot I have names on these, and so there's quite a few of them, right? Tilapia, yellow perch. We never did the tilapia one, which I kind of liked. I thought it was cool looking. So I eventually realized that they weren't going to be able to do, the yellow perch was actually easy to do because it was simple, but they weren't going to be able to do all the technical side of it. So I had to come up with a formula, and they basically just told me, and there's another one. They basically just told me, hey, look, you're going to have to do it pretty much like color by number. Okay. So what I did is I basically drew another one out again, and that's what I pretty much came up with. I came up with every single dot, line, everything. Every one of them was going to look like that, right? For the most part. They were all going to have that design with that dot placement right there, and that made it easier for them to do. So the first one they were going to do was pretty much like a white and black one. Of course, the white and black one wasn't going to be that. We always wanted it to be that white and silver. I did it black just so they could see it easier. Same thing with some of these. So that's kind of what we did was, I'll kind of show you. So that's kind of what they started to look like, right? The design is the same, but we can just mess with the colors on them. And it got pretty good. Now the problem with me was I'm very, very picky about colors and what I want it to look like. And even though I could draw them perfectly on here, they didn't come out as great as I wanted them to on the actual baits. So we had to continually work with that and get them as close as possible. And it was just a struggle because, you know, a lot of frog colors are very, they're all kind of like, they're not broken up into scales and stuff like that. You know, they're all very greens and whites and yellows and browns, and they have some little dots on them, but not what I was really wanting to do. But we started getting better at it. We had to figure out how to do the top part of it. When I say the top part, like on this, we had to figure out how to get that they can print on one side, okay, and they can print on the other, but they can't print on top or the bottom. I don't know if you want to call that the bottom or the sides, if you want to call this the top and the bottom. So they had to make that all one color and blend it in. And what was cool was, like, even like this one, they do the fins pretty cool. So that was getting the colors right, along with getting this gamut right, was a tough deal, because we had already gotten the hook, the action, everything else done. We still only had the tail looking like this now, right? We had the tail looking where it was all formed, and it was all these small strands like you would have like a spinnerbait. I always had it drawn up like this, but so and they started getting the colors where they could get the colors down. This is one of the earlier ones. Okay, so they could get the colors, like the tips of it, you know, which I always wanted, man, because like when you see perch, I always wanted that, man. When you see perch down in the water, we all take like chartreuse dip and dye or whatever, and we dip certain things, right? And to me, it makes them look like the perch, because them perch have really bright blue or bright chartreuse sometimes on the tips, man, or orange. They really stand out. So I really wanted the tips of all the tails to be, to make that a staple in what we were trying to do. All of a sudden, one day they sent me this bait, right? And I think it was this one or this one. And they sent me this bait, and it was all the tail was cut like this. And I said, hey, well, like, what did they do? And they're like, oh, they were just trying something. And I'm like, no, that's what I wanted. I wanted it to be really, really flat material. And I just didn't know they could physically do this. So like, they nailed it. And I was like, yes, do not change the tail. I'll get the specs on how long it was. So I mean, I literally marked off all of how long I wanted the tail, which is a big deal. And I know a lot of people think that the tail might be too big or whatever. The tail is very important in this bait, and I'll explain why later. So the tail kind of just came to fruition, man. It just happened on its own. I always wanted them to do it like this. I just didn't know they could. So once again, now we're on prototype like at number 8 or 9, and we were still trying to figure out the ventilation system. We were putting holes on different parts of the body, and when we first did it, the first hole we had was back here, and your bait never hits the water back here, but it would still sometimes suck in water. Now the first ones we did were fine, never got water in them. What happened is, and I've learned this with just building baits, is the molds they have over time wear out or do whatever, and the inconsistencies become greater. And so some of them would get water in them, some of them wouldn't. You would never know which ones. And so we moved the hole up here, still out of the water. It would every once in a while get water in them. And it just became one of those deals where it's like, how do we fix this? Because it's not even in, the bait's never even touching the water, and yet it can still get water in from some stupid hole up at the top. So what I did was I went out there, where is it? And I started messing with putting a hole in the bottom of this thing. Okay. And so what I would do was I'd heat up a lighter, and I eventually got to this size safety pin, because I use needles, I use all kinds of stuff. And I could put a hole in the back of this thing, and if I made it just right, just perfect, right? You could set this down in the water and it wouldn't sink. And I can't tell you how many times I would do all this to all these baits, bathtub, buckets of water, and put them in there. And I'd walk away for like an hour and come back, and the ones that would float, I know which ones were the best ones. And I figured out what size hole was the best one to where it wouldn't sink. And the reason this is important was I wanted that hole in the back for this reason. When you cast this bait out there, it doesn't go forward, right? It casts backwards, right? So the back of your bait is going out. Well, when you throw this bait, it's starting right here. And as you throw it, it whips around as you make your cast. Well, any water that's in this bait, if you filled up this bait full of water, like push it in and squeeze water into it, and you threw it out there, that whip of that motion of your rod and casting it is going to force all the water out of that one little hole. So, in theory, every time you make a cast with this bait, if there's any water in it, every single cast you make throws water out, right? You never have to squeeze water. So now you have to find the right hole, size hole for the water to come out, but not big enough for water to come in a whole bunch. So I kind of figured out that there's an angle, a right angle to put it in there in a right size hole. So my goal was, how do I throw this out there and not sink? Well, if you throw it out there and just let it hit the water, it'll stay there for days. It'll never sink, ever. It sinks because of when you pop it, there's that suction that we talked about earlier of sucking water in. Well, my whole key was, I'm gonna throw this thing as far as I can out there. And as long as I can work it back to the boat, even if a little water gets in it and it doesn't sink, it doesn't matter, because my next cast is gonna throw any water out. And usually even the bad ones would take multiple casts over a long period of time to get in a little bit of water. One cast, almost nothing ever gets in it. So that was the whole key. So as long as I could throw it out there, and I tried working it every which way possible to make it sink. And I'd work it all the way to the boat, and I'd look down there and I'd let it sit right behind, right by the boat. And as long as it never sunk, I was good. I mean, I even got to where I would troll the bait out further to where no one could even make it cast that long, and then work it all the way back. And like I said, it wouldn't have mattered because my next cast would throw any water out if any water ever got into it. That was a big deal, man. I was really proud of that. We figured that one out, and now you can go years. I mean, you will never literally on the Poppin' Perch now, if it has that hole in the back, you will never squeeze water out of this thing ever. So that was a pretty cool deal. In the process of getting that figured out, we got the gamut right and the sealing right and everything. The problem is that we made it so good and so strong back here. You got to realize that you're taking a huge rod with 65-pound braid. And if you're like me, when that thing hits, you're putting every bit of force you have into that rod, that braid, and this bait. And what happens is something's bound to give, right? Not necessarily going to, but it's going to find its weak spot. So that wasn't the weak spot anymore. You can't bend the big hooks on there because they're phenomenal. Chances are you're not going to break your braid. Rod's probably the first thing to break. But what happened is it started creating problems in the mouth of this thing. And we had that thing really, really sealed. But what we did was we figured out a better way, a better system, right? We incorporated this cone, and it's just a circular deal, and it sits on the inside of this mouth connected to this line tie. Well, if you didn't have that cone, all you do is having this sealed just by plastic being sealed on with glue to this line tie. Well, you put that cone on the back side of that thing, so now the pressure is now spread out on top of that cone. Well, it's a lot harder to, bust through that plastic with a cone than it is one little piece of wire. That changed everything. Now that's why you never have problems with it coming out. There's a big cone back there that holds it in place, that won't let it go through that plastic and split that plastic. That was a pretty key feature. So with all that being said, that's where we did. And we got the colors, we got the ventilation system, we got the gamut in the back, we got the front cone, we started getting the look on both sides, we got the tail just right. And I'll go back to that tail. The reason I want to explain to you about why the tail is so important, why it is the length the way it is. I always tell everyone it's kind of like a kite. Okay, if you take a kite out there in the wind without a tail on a kite, that kite's going to go crazy. I mean, it's going to go it'll never go the direction you want it to. When you put that tail on there, it settles that kite down. Okay, it tries to take off and the tail puts drag on it. This thing without a tail is about as crazy as you could ever imagine, which is what we want. We want this thing erratic, and we want it to be able to do everything, to pop, slurp, dart, walk the dog, everything. What the tail is, and I'll tell you another thing, I wanted this bait to work fast, and I'll explain that. Every bait works really good slow. The faster you speed it up, you start seeing the inconsistencies of it. So when I would take this bait in practice, I'd just go out there and I'd try to just pop it and hit it as hard as I could, because I noticed the harder you did that, if you get the wrong baits, they'll dive, they'll roll over, they'll show their inconsistencies and their failures. Well, this one never would do that, and here's why. That tail acts like a drag system, right? So as you're just going crazy, it darts this way, right on your initial jerk. That tail drags it back into place to where when you pop it again, it's already in perfect place. Because what happens is a bait will go off this way, and when you pop it again, it turns, right? It turns or it comes up, and then you pop it again, now it wants to dive this way. So it tries to overcorrect. Well, the tail, when it does this, brings it back into place. By the time you pop it again, even as fast as you can do it, it gets it in the right spot again to where when you pop it again, it's in the right spot and it does the right thing. So it's always consistent. That tail brings it back to where it needs to be, to where you can pop it again. If not, it would dive, it would sink, it would go left, right. And that's what's pretty cool is, like I said, you make it go as fast as possible and it works right, it works phenomenal slow. So I was really proud of the way we did that and how it worked, and that's why the tail is the way it is. Like I said, there's a lot of features on here that we took into consideration on why we built it a certain way. The newest feature, which is cool, is the paint jobs on these now. Like, so here's just the regular white, right? And of course, white's gonna be easy, right? It's gonna always look good. But now we figured out, Strike King's figured out how to make these colors, right? And they are phenomenal. And I had it upside down. Here's why. These colors are not painted, man. These are pictures. And so we spent a couple months, me and Crispin, and we took pictures of perch, warmouth, grinnell, tilapia. It didn't matter. We took pictures of every single bait fish out there that we could get our hands on, and these are some of the pictures that we came up with. I mean, this is an actual picture of a perch, and they figured out. I think we're the only company that has figured out a way to put that print on a bait, not a hard bait, not a plastic bait, but a bait like this. And so these are all actual pictures of actual fish. I mean, where else can you get that? Like, you can't get more real than that. And so that's what's pretty cool, is that, like, there it is. And then they figured out how to match the tail. So I hate it. I hate it when you have two different blues on a bait or anything. Vehicle, you know, you don't want this kind of shade of blue and this kind of shade of blue. And so they figured out how to make these colors match up exactly like the actual bait. So that's been pretty cool. And like I said, I'm gonna throw this in there. I understand that this isn't always possible without a company. And I understand that, but what you're doing is, it still started out as an idea, and luckily they had a little faith in me, because I had some of this already drawn out. But if I'd have known to get the specs and the colors and everything else, I probably could have presented this to another company, you know. And that's what I want to share with y'all. Like, there's a way to do all this to where you can get a lot further along in designing a bait, rather than just saying, oh, I have an idea in my head, and you try to sell that to someone, because that doesn't really work. Luckily, I had already had some drawings and some things written down, and I had a knack for frog fishing already, so I had a lot of how it was supposed to look like. But Strike King was really, really awesome with me and letting me play a huge role in this and really take control over it. And what I'll say is I've learned through this industry that it's not cheap building one of these baits, and they could have easily have stopped right there, right? This was like prototype number 4 or 5. They could have stopped on that one and just said, hey, you know what? We've spent enough money on this thing. We just need to come out with it. I bet you we went through 14, 15. I can't, to be honest with you, I can't remember how many prototypes we went through to get it right. And to this day, if we want to change something on it to make it better, they have no problem doing it. And I'm really proud of that they would take, you know, they didn't want to put out something that wasn't right. And they just kept on and would just kept throwing money at it and kept redesigning it and took the time. And that's why it took 2 years. We wanted to make sure it was right. And like I said, we might figure out something else to make it better. I don't know what that would be right now, because we're pretty happy with the way it is, but that doesn't mean we won't. But I'm really proud to be associated with them, that they would, you know, that they're really going to try that hard to make something right, rather than just throw it out there and go on, you know, knowing that it wasn't right. And like I said, the countless hours of testing we've done on this is shows why it's done pretty good. And that's kind of what I wanted to share with y'all. I don't know if too many people have done stuff like this or whatever, but I just want to show y'all kind of from start to finish the process it took, from the drawings to the prototypes to redesigning to all these things. I'm sure a lot of people haven't seen all this mess, and I mean it is. I mean, what's crazy is this is about a quarter of the mess that I have, and the reason is most of the ones that I have, if I can find one, I don't have very many like this. Look like this. No hook, right? Torn up in the front. We tore probably 75% of our prototypes. We'd tear them apart. We'd look at them again. We'd fish them for a while. They usually ended up going in the trash because we'd ruin them trying to figure out better ways of how to do certain things. So these are just some of the ones that actually made it through the process. You know, what's funny is I couldn't tell you how many fish we caught on some of these prototypes and stuff like that. And then I kept a lot of the other ones just because. And like I said, it's pretty cool, pretty long process. What I will say is when we designed the Pipsqueak and the Pad Perch, the process took a tenth of the time. I mean, I think the Pipsqueak was 2 prototypes. The Pad Perch was maybe 3. Both of them, though, we hit almost dead on from the get-go. We just changed very, very minor few things. When we had the other stuff of the hook and the shape, we would almost have to just change a shape or a little bit here and there. But for the most part, once we had it all figured out, those things were easy. So it was kind of nice not having to worry too much about them. But that's the process. I hope y'all enjoyed it. I hope it was something different. And like I said, if you got an idea, do something with it. You know, like, just don't talk about it. Put it down on paper. You never know. Like I said, I had this one 6-7 years before I ever actually got a chance to start working on it. And I ain't gonna lie, man, I would walk into ICAST and some of these places every year just looking around going, I hope no one did something like this. I can't tell you how many times I was like, please don't see anything like this. I don't want to see anything like this, because I wanted to be the first one that made a perch that did all this. So it was pretty cool. Like I said, I hope y'all enjoy it. Like I said, if you got something like this, you know, go out there, put it down on paper, try to make it look presentable, man. You never know who you might run into that can take that next lure to the next step. Because, man, let me tell you something. There's nothing better than designing your own lure and then catching the fish off of it. It's pretty rewarding. So hope y'all enjoy. Let me know what y'all think.